Hello, my name is Chris Blask. This is the Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. I'm the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. With me today is Paul Rosenzweig in Costa Rica, who has a fascinating background in the legal side of things. So we're going to be talking about that today. Paul, say hello.
Howdy. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. So, and if you wouldn't, again, we're not going to we're long bios and so forth, but your experience and the roles you had and so forth put you in the legal aspect of policy about cybersecurity for many, many years. And we're at the spot right now where everybody's talking about software bill of materials and software supply chain transparency and the implications of that. We have executive orders flying around. And, as we often talk about in this medium here and all the bloody time, what does this really mean? Is it a thing? What are the implications? And it's the policy implications I keep coming down to. Technically, we'll do it. We'll come up with agreed standards. We'll share things. Companies between themselves will work things out. But we get into use cases, mentioned this one to you, the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland, has a supply chain proof of concept they've been working on for a while with Boeing and with Rolls-Royce, with looking at making a blade for a Rolls-Royce turbine in Scotland on a smart machine that's assembled in the UK, installed in a Boeing airframe in the EU, and sold to a foreign air force. How do you track down the provenance of the software bill of materials that was running on that machine at the time of a blade was made? But it's the legal side of things, right, that I keep coming down to, and it's your expertise and your experience, and I want to try to shoot down my thoughts. So, looking backwards, with all the concerns of intellectual property control in this, how secure, in your opinion or thoughts, have we been? Corporate intellectual property has been breached many, many times, cybernetically or directly. Have we had really good control in the first place? Is it going, up or down? Do you think with the changes writ large in the world today?
Well, I think the way I would answer that is to say that breaches of intellectual property are as old as intellectual property itself. That is why the U.S. Constitution created the Patent and Trademark Office to protect intellectual property as conceived of at that time. And that is why the first efforts of the Customs Service set up by Alexander Hamilton were, at least in part, to interdict counterfeit goods that were entering the United States without paying customs duties. So, in one perspective, this is not a new problem. This is a problem as old as intellectual property. If I have a right to exclude others from the use of some incorporeal idea or concept or good that I have created, that right needs to be defined by lawyers, given an enforceable mechanism. But both those things are not a guarantee. We're always going to have theft. We're always going to have cheaters. And the question for people on my side of the house is how well defined are the rights, how easy it is to claim or create them, and how effective is my ability to protect them. A great example that is today, Winnie the Pooh just went public the other day. The original A.A. Milne copyright expired. So you can now put a picture of Winnie the Pooh out there if you want for free. But the Disney version of him with the red vest is still under protection for Disney's copyright. And Disney has a very effective and aggressive legal team that will sue your ass. Can I say that? Will sue you. Will sue you if you violate their copyright. And so that's a great example of a well-defined piece of intellectual property, a pretty effective mechanism. But I also guarantee you that if you travel around the web, you will find any number of red vested Winnie the Poohs that are not licensed that people are using, and Disney can't catch them all. So, how secure is intellectual property before the transitions that we're thinking about now? It is as secure and as effective as the rule of law can make it, which is moderately secure, but not bulletproof by any stretch of the imagination.
Well said. Right. That takes us into the present, right? And our next question is, what should legal teams be thinking about today? If in fact we're in a transition on this topic, I certainly hear a lot of concern about IP control. We can't, it is a central issue beyond all the technical things in SBOMs. Seriously, no, we can't give that to. And right now, a lot of legal teams are hearing this from executives, right? And I think what you said is really the answer. But what do you think if you're a lawyer in a company right now and people are coming to you about software bill of materials and they're extremely concerned or aware of IP issues, what should they be doing?
Well, let's break it down into the kind of two pieces: defining the right and then enforceability. Right now, my own sense is that we're still struggling to define what we mean by intellectual property around the SBOM, software bill of materials concept. And what we lack, I think, are standardized definitions. In most contractual agreements these days, there are standard terms that are part of every contract. You've seen them, for example, 30 days to get paid. That's the standard term. It's created by the Uniform Commercial Code, unless you change it. And we can change it and say 45. So what lawyers in this space need to focus on, is kind of the standardized definitions of intellectual property and its protections within the digital software bill of materials intellectual property space. It almost doesn't matter what your specific answer is, so long as you have a standardized definition and the ability to contract out from that definition if your and my circumstances require a differential result. So what does that mean more particularly? I think it means that let's take the case that you posited, the use case you posited earlier, the Scottish manufacturer, the French assembler, and the Turkish end user. Here are some of the questions that you would be thinking about. First, whose law applies? Are we going to apply Scottish law, French law, or Turkish law? Or, Rolls-Royce is a British company, so, but maybe it's an American design. So lots of different possibilities. So you need choice of law, right? Also, with that comes choice of venue and choice of remedy. That brings with it whose enforcement mechanisms we're going to apply. And I'll turn to that in a second. Second, we're going to impose transparency requirements, but what does that mean? Precisely, down to what level of detail, right? The whole exercise of DBOM and SBOM, as I understand it, from technical guys like you, is defining with particularity the software components. But it isn't down to the name of the guy who wrote the code, 16 years ago, because it's at some higher. So you need to define for us, and in this, as a lawyer, I look to you as a technical person, and I look to the standard setting people at the Department of Commerce or in the UK equivalent to tell me what the reasonable thing is, and then we'll incorporate that as the default term. And then if Rolls-Royce needs a higher degree of fidelity, they can say, yes, I really need to know whether Blask wrote line 2,762.
That's right.
At some point, we'll reach the limits of the possible in terms of maintaining that, especially for legacy codes, but that's a different story altogether. So where we are, a default level of detail on transparency as to creation, and then likewise a default level of transparency as to any subsequent modifications, changes that have been done, right? And then another default level of transparency as to who does the assembly of the code, right, for the smart machine. So that, because the assembler, the implementer is often different than the developer. You tell me what that. I need you. I as a lawyer need you as a geek to tell me exactly what would be the most useful parts of that. But once you tell me that, I can make that into a standard disclosure form. I should make it into a standard disclosure form. And then taken together with that, we need an enforcement mechanism. The biggest problem I see there is not just the choice of law, though that's hard enough between Scotland, France, America, and Turkey. But as you and I both know, a huge portion of intellectual property and intellectual property theft is occurring outside of the bounds of nations that respect intellectual property in the first instance, and that don't respect the rule of law. It is a very hard problem to figure out what you're going to do with criminal Russian gangs, or the Iranians or the Chinese or the North Koreans, to take that. And so the last piece of this that I would say that is an important kind of thing for lawyers to do is to come up with some form of international enforcement mechanism. Now, it may not be a legal mechanism like I can sue you, but we enforce financial laws mostly through naming and shaming, and eventually people get with it. We are still a long way from that throughout the realm of software and of things cyber more generally. But that's the goal we have to get to, a place where we can shame Russia into punishing the people who violate the terms of the agreements that we so carefully created.
Well, in country of origin is a good pivot to our last question, looking forward. And, when I look down into the code that your world writes, these contracts and so forth, I see terms that, as a geek, and to be clear, I really just play one on TV to the real geeks out there, right? When you ask me to define how to determine country of origin for a piece of software, I have a lot of questions. And the real answer right now is you can't, and not the way we're doing it. But I know enough technology, I know enough law that I look at things like smart contracts. And I may not have read up on exactly how they work and so forth, but I see those in these supply chain systems, driving people like you and I to have these conversations. Say, all right, Boeing needs us to commit to this, and you're the lawyer, and you say, hang on a second, how exactly do we do that? If a smart contract is a live document, that's not sitting on a file folder somewhere, it's not saved in a network drive, but it is being checked every second, every microsecond, against the actual process being executed that it's written for. I'm an optimist, but I think that drives us to refine what you said back at the beginning. It's working relatively well now because in an open, democratic, capitalist-oriented system, we try to be more efficient. We try to be comply with what the market wants. I think this drives lawyers and geeks to be sitting down and working a lot of things out where, the topic today, IP control, for example, will get better. You'll know exactly where your IP is and where it isn't as we look forward. Or am I being too?
No, well, well, you've actually hit on something that's a lot broader phenomenon, which is that lawyers' first instinct, and this is how I teach my law classes on this. Lawyers' first instinct is to take new wine and to pour it into old bottles, which is to say, to take existing legal doctrines and pour the new wine of things that are happening in the cyber domain, whether it's armed conflict or intellectual property, into their existing bottles of doctrine that surround them, because they're familiar. I like my bottles. right? The critical policy choice that sometimes needs to be made is I need a new bottle. I need a new doctrine. And the concept of smart contracts that are live and constantly reflecting an updated set of circumstances is really, I mean, you could say it's an old bottle because it's still a contract, but it's really a new bottle. Because for us as lawyers, contracts, agreements are fixed in time, fixed in place, fixed in meaning. You and I agree that I will buy your boat now. Period, full stop, end of story. That agreement doesn't change. Smart contracts will offer us an opportunity to embed contractual terms into the manufacturing process, if you will.
Right.
And that's something brand new. I confess to you honestly that it's sufficiently new that I don't think that lawyers or technologists really grasp yet how that's going to play out over the next 5 to 10 years. If you're an optimist, see Chris Blask, you think that it will enable greater efficiency and more particularity in terms of agreement, all that sort of thing. If you're a pessimist, see Paul Rosenzweig, you think it may very well just gum up the works altogether, create new, as yet unanticipated definitional and enforcement problems, and you're a little afraid of them. But that's okay. Let's check back in 10 years and we can see who's right. Maybe 5.
Yep. We've run into one use case already. I think fits a good legal wrap to this, because I think this adds value. Where if you're my manufacturer and you're making my product for me that I then go on to sell, and part of our legal contract I've worked out with my legal team is that it will not go through the shrink wrap tunnel at the end of manufacturing at more than 92 degrees Celsius. And your shrink wrap machine attests, to each, batch that goes through. It changes the model. It's not because, I'm going back to my lawyers to find out, why the box was bad. Is that everybody knows that box is bad. And we now embed legal terms that say, oh, if a box goes bad, here's what I want it to do. So we have lawyers adding, I think, business value in ways, that I think you touched on with your comments in manufacturing.
Oh, I hope you're right.
So thank you very much, Paul. This has been fantastic. As always, wonderful talking to you. Thanks to anybody who is out there listening and watching. Wish you a great day and a good weekend. We'll see you later on today, probably, Paul.
Yep. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thanks, folks. Cheers.